Good evening and welcome to 1010, your top 10 news in 10 minutes. I'm Andy Hong. No time for dilly-dallying. Let's get to the papal visit correspondent Lauren Song online to give us the latest. Lauren?
Thanks, Andy. More than 40,000 people gathered at Independence Hall on Saturday to hear Pope Francis speak of the historic site where the American colonists declared their freedom from British reign. Society is weakened wherever and whenever injustice prevails, he told the crowd. He continued on to encourage recent U.S. immigrants. I ask you not to forget, like those who came before you, you bring many gifts to this great nation. During his 6-day trip to the U.S., he visited President Obama at the White House, gave a speech to Congress, and spoke at the United Nations and said Mass at New York's Madison Square Garden. However, not all the events are church-sanctioned. Catholics in the LGBT community were holding gatherings, championing gay parents and their children. Pope Francis has pleaded compassion in the case of same-sex marriage, but for many, the church has been at a standstill. On Friday, Pope Francis addressed the United Nations, thus becoming the 5th pope to do so. First, he said, society is ruled by wealthy elites. He continued on to question the true effectiveness of the United Nations. World leaders seem not to realize that while they hedge, real people suffer. While praising the UN as an important instrument for good, the Pope also noted that certain countries have been able to manipulate it for ill will. He also cited nuclear weapons as poor instruments of peace that unite us in fear and distrust, and criticized the lack of checks and balances in the system. Back to you, Andy.
A lot to process and think about. Thank you, Lauren. Besides helping establish peaceful ties between Cuba and the United States last year, the Pope once again made a lasting impact in American politics. The day after his visit to U.S. Congress, Speaker of the House John Boehner, a devout Catholic, announced his resignation. It came as a shock. There were no previous announcements, even hinting of a resignation, and even Boehner himself admitted that the decision was spontaneous during a morning prayer. The reasoning, Boehner's leadership has been under fire for a long time from the more conservative sub-factions of the Republican Party that could lead to a catastrophic internal fight over Boehner's leadership that would get in the way of the already overwhelming fight over Planned Parenthood involving a government shutdown. Therefore, Boehner yielded to the pressure to hopefully turn Congress's attention toward policy issues and not to himself. The Republican Party is now scrambling to find a successor with Kevin McCarthy as the most likely pick, but it's clear that Boehner was heavily influenced, albeit indirectly, by the Pope. The Speaker was seen shedding tears multiple times during the Pontiff's congressional address. In the morning press conference, Boehner mentioned a small instance during a private moment with the Pope. In Boehner's own words, the Pope puts his arm around me and kind of pulls me to him and says, "Please pray for me." Well, he said, "Who am I to pray for the Pope?" But I did. Fun fact, the Dalai Lama was due to visit the USA next month, but postponed the trip due to illness. Our best wishes to the man that he will get better soon. However, another man who did make it to the United States was Xi Jinping, the Chinese president. After his brief stay in Seattle, President Xi arrived at the White House to address various issues concerning both nations, like climate change and cutting emissions. But arguably, the most important issue debated was cyber warfare, hacking each other's computer systems to steal technology and commercial secrets. President Obama announced Xi and he agreed to not pursue cybercrime as a policy option, although they had always denied previous cases of cybercrime to each other. Meanwhile, in Mina, Saudi Arabia, a stampede during the Hajj pilgrimage killed 769 and injured more than 930 people. Authorities are conducting a thorough investigation while numerous foreign nations are criticizing the Saudi government for repeated safety failures during the annual pilgrimage to Mecca. Iran, which had 130 of its citizens killed in the disaster, is calling for a United States investigation on the inadequate safety measures for the pilgrims. Saudi Arabia has already spent billions trying to improve the infrastructure, as ironically shown in the recent construction crane collapse accident that killed over 100, and blamed the pilgrims themselves on social media for, according to a BBC report, not following safety instructions. Iran is definitely on the forefront of this issue, which is good that they're concerned for the safety of the people involved in the pilgrimage. However, many critics see the move as a way to keep regional rival Saudi Arabia in check. Martin Winterkorn, the CEO of Volkswagen, resigned recently after an elaborate plot to bypass emission limitation laws was uncovered by authorities. 11 million vehicles have been affected and there are $18 billion at stake for potential fines for the number one global car making company. Switzerland went as far as putting the sale of some models on hiatus, while other countries around the world, such as Germany, the United States, Norway, India, and others, began criminal investigations of their own. Upset drivers are also rising up to file lawsuits against the company on top of its already recent 30% drop in stocks. Matthias Müller, former executive of Porsche, took Winterkorn's place. Porsche has had a long track record of excellence, so hopefully Müller will restore Volkswagen's reputation. Meanwhile, football star Neymar is under investigation as well, this time for tax evasion. A Brazilian court froze nearly $47 million worth of assets for allegedly evading around $60 million of taxes from 2011 to 2013 by not declaring various sources of income. But not much of a shocker. FIFA, as you know, already one of the most corrupt institutions of the world. And we reported last month that a suspect had been arrested for Bangkok's Erewhon Shrine bombing, but Thai authorities announced that he was not a likely main suspect who actually carried out the bombing. It was announced today, however, that the suspect confessed his guilt to be the main bomber when he was shown new surveillance footage. Another man also purportedly confessed to authorities that he had triggered the bomb placed by the man in custody. We still aren't completely sure if the confessions are confirmed, but it would certainly be good news if it's true. And like a scene from a Bond movie, Russia and Estonia exchanged 2 convicted spies on a bridge over the Payusa River, a natural border between the two nations. Russian spy Alexei Dresin was imprisoned in 2012, while Estonian Estern Kover was sentenced to 15 years last month. Russia's bad breakup with Ukraine, which is still producing casualties today, is causing issues with Russia's relationship with its Baltic neighbors, which joined NATO in 2004. Hopefully, this exchange diffused some of the tensions. Finally, some good news and no strings attached. Nigeria was removed from the list of polio endemic countries. No cases of naturally occurring or wild polio for the past year. The Global Polio Eradication Initiative, formed in 1988, has been hard at work to provide sanitation and clean water to prevent the disease, which usually occurs in children. Back in 88, more than 120 nations had polio each year. Today, only 2 countries have wild polio, one Afghanistan and Pakistan. World Health Organization figures point to 41 wild polio cases so far this year compared to 200 by the fall of 2014. Good going, guys. And now for this week's science news, we'll go to sometimes cameraman, sometimes PD, sometimes correspondent, Renaissance man Brian Kim. Brian?
Thanks, Andy. I'm Brian Kim with this week's science news. Get your cameras and folding chairs ready because this Sunday there will be a supermoon lunar eclipse. A supermoon is when the moon appears larger than usual because the moon hits its perigee, the closest distance between the moon and the Earth. However, on Sunday, not only is there a supermoon, but also a total lunar eclipse. Now, this combination of celestial events is a first since 1983, and the next one is projected to happen in 2033. People in the United States can see the rare eclipse at 5:11 p.m. until 10:22 p.m. PST. The eclipse is projected to reach its maximum point at 7:47 p.m. If weather permits, I recommend you to watch this rare phenomenon and end your weekend with a beautiful giant blood moon. Back to you, Andy.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. And that was the top 10 news of the week. I'm Andy Hong. For all my Korean friends out there, 가족과 함께 즐겁고 안전한 한가위 보내시길 바랍니다. If you heard some regional dialect or 사투리 in there, you heard it right. What can I say? That's the reason I don't anchor in Korean. As the head PD that I worked for at SBS over the summer told me, with my Korean, I can't even anchor at 아리랑 TV. UPD님, 듣고 있으면 노력하고 있습니다. 진짜로. Anyways, thanks for watching and we'll see you next time with more